Working in resource poor environments, the potential for improvements and change is that much larger, which means that you don't need a tool to measure the impact. You can see it. I mean, in the international education sector, we spend an awful lot of time looking at little pilot programs, and far too often we're not asking at the outset, can this scale? Is this a potential systemic solution or systems-wide solution? And if the answer's either I don't know, if you don't know, then go do some thinking on that before we run a pilot. And if the answer's no, then it's useless. Then all it's ever going to do is to solve for a few children, and that's it. It's not treating those, whether they be children, whether they be less experienced, as empty vessels, recognizing that they bring skills and experience which can add significantly to whether it's the education system or it's the employment. I think that's no one is an empty vessel. Everyone brings experience, and that experience is valuable.
Welcome back to the Future of Learning. I'm Andrew Howie, Director of Partnerships at Open Elms. In previous episodes, we've explored how learning and development needs to become more strategic, more data-driven, more responsive to business needs. And we've talked a lot about AI as a tool for amplifying human capability, but we've also discussed the risks of moving too fast. Now, today, I want to add another dimension to that conversation. What can well-resourced organizations learn from contexts where resources are scarce, where one-size-fits-all doesn't work, and where you have to prove impact to survive? Well, my guest is Felix Edwards. Felix has spent many years helping build organizational capability in international development, especially in places like Nigeria and South Sudan, and I'm sure he'll tell us more about that. He now helps organizations measure whether their learning and development efforts actually work. And his perspective bridges two worlds that rarely talk to each other: international development capacity building and corporate learning and development. So I think we're going to find this quite challenging, and it'll be interesting to hear Felix's thoughts on this. So Felix, welcome. And before we dive into measurement and systems and all of that stuff, tell us about your journey. How did you get into this work? How did you get into the field that you're currently in?
Sure, thanks. Indirectly, I think is the easiest way of talking about it. I think I started out as a teacher. My focus has been in education, but I broadened out beyond classroom education. That is an awful lot of what I do. I've sort of stumbled into various different areas of work, from getting into organizational development, organizational management, just because I've been working for organizations in which there's been a need for that. As well as an interest in it from being a sort of pure educationalist. And so my career has sort of zigzagged a little bit. Sometimes I've been more focused on the technical delivery of programs, working directly with schools and education systems. Other times I'd be more focused on the sort of more corporate world, working with small, medium and large organizations on building their capacity to deliver those services. So, as far as I'm a teacher, it's hard to walk past the classroom without wanting to go in and engage with students. But I've always appreciated the breadth of areas I've got involved with, because I think having a broader education, having those experiences brings more to a particular area of focus. You bring those different perspectives, which I think has been both valuable as well as interesting. So,
how's that kind of teaching experience molded you in the kind of work that you're doing now, and the kind of work that led up to what you're doing now? 'Cause you've been a teacher, you probably still see at your heart that you are a teacher, but you've obviously moved off into other areas. So what has that kind of brought to you in those other areas, and what are you now kind of doing, which is showcasing like what you're all about right now, I suppose?
Yeah, I think two particular things. One, I think the most powerful thing you can say as a teacher is I don't know. Recognizing that no matter the level of education, the knowledge you bring to it, you don't know everything, and that learning is a two-way process. And as much as whether you're in the classroom or in an organizational corporate setting where yes, there is knowledge and experience to impart, being always open to be challenged on that. Say whether it's by a child in a classroom, by a colleague, by a junior or senior in the organization, to be open to that, to the idea that your knowledge is not absolute. And so I think that's always been a key for me. There's a sense of always wanting to be learning, always wanted to be challenging yourself. Learning is never over. It links to that first part. Is that, the moment you think you know it all, it's a really risky point, because that's when you start to think you can start second guessing everyone. And that's a bad situation. So it's always been always pursuing more learning, to be in a situation where you're constantly challenging yourself to learn more.
Can you give us a specific example of where that particular element of what you're talking about now was driven home to you, where you were like, yeah, okay, yeah, that's something I'm going to have to remember? Because it was a particular moment or a particular example you can draw on.
And I think, going back to teaching, is you're taught tools and methods to learn. I was a maths teacher, so it's methods on solving problems. And even now, actually, I've got young kids, and they'll come home and they'll say, I've got a maths problem, and I'll look at it and go, I know the way I'd solve it. I know the way that, and I know that way works, but it's not necessarily the way that they've been taught to solve a challenge. So me parroting back what I've been told is not necessarily useful. I need to listen to them to help to understand their sort of learning journey, to understand what they know and what they're finding challenging in that environment, to then help them. I can get them to the solution. That's not the issue, but it's oftentimes that's not the real learning. The learning is that path to the solution. And so, and you can't do that without listening to them, without hearing what they're bringing to it, how they've learned previously. And I think that's something that translates to any situation. If you think in whether it's in an organization, in a school or whatever, you're just there to show people the way, you'll be a decent teacher, a decent educator, but the greatness comes when you start to recognize people's perspectives, what they bring to a learning situation, and adjust the knowledge. You're not just providing knowledge, but it's situating it. So, and I think that's the final point. It's about practice. It is imparting knowledge is only part of it. It's putting it into practice.
Yeah, you touched on something there. I think a few years ago, it's a few years ago now, UNESCO and United Nations, and there was a very much a focus on a shift away from teachers teaching and becoming more of a facilitator of knowledge. In the sense of how do you bring that? How do you, instead of just saying, chalk and talk, and how do you, this is how you do it, learn it, but actually learning was in the process, as you've mentioned there. The learning is part of, how do you facilitate that process so that they remember things and use them practically? So, in terms of that, then in terms of like, that's what you've learned obviously from your teaching and from where you've got on next. So, well, tell us about what you're doing right now. Tell us about what you're seeing in terms of what you've learned. Just taking that example in terms of listening to people, listening to their perspectives, applying that into the situation to then get positive outcomes. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing now, and then some examples about how that's kind of how you've grown with that kind of philosophy?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I'm doing at the moment is working with a series of schools in Nairobi, in Kenya. Now, these are schools that have received support over a good number of years. We're working with a number of Kenyan partners who've been supporting these schools for a good number of years. What's been really, we've not come up with any particularly revolutionary approach. But what we're seeing is by and I'll come to what we've done. I'll come back to that in a second. the impact has been significantly larger. Our partners who are doing the delivery, they're the ones who are providing the actual training with the schools and the follow-up with the schools. They're coming to us and saying, this is really interesting because we've taken a slightly different approach. And that's partly the space we've given them to do that and the suggestions we've made as part of that. And they said, we are seeing a significantly, not an incremental, but a significant improvement in what's happening in the schools. And so coming back to what that is, we've made the learners, in this case, there's most of them are school administrators, school proprietors, school directors, etc. The people running the school. We have made them the real focus of the program. And it sounds very simple and it sounds utterly common sense that you make the learners the center of the program. But what we've not done is said, we think they need this. And so let's set up a program. And we said, right, working with our trainers, we challenge them and challenge them. I say, listen, don't tell us what you think then. Go talk to them. Go design a program and ensure the program is flexible to their needs. So don't be fixed and say, right, we've got a 10 module program and this is what we're going to do. We're just going to run through it. Go and do an assessment first. From that, sketch out a program, start running some sessions and evolve as you go. And just that putting the learners at the absolute heart of what they're doing and it being utterly responsive to their needs, that's what's made the difference. Because what we're now seeing is it's not just those schools are taking on that learning; they're taking on the leadership of the development. They've now created, the schools are now come together. They're demanding things, and some topics in which you'd be surprised. School directors asking for more information about tax and to be educated on tax. This is not the most exciting things to be doing, but they're the one, they see how important that is. And they're saying, we need more sessions on this. Can we have this? And it's a small tweak, but it's having a really significant impact on learning. And it's just that key. It's putting the learner at the heart of it, not coming in as an outsider. I worked in all these places. I bring all this experience and learning, but it's actually taking a step back. Right, I'm going to create an environment, but ultimately, I'm an alien in this environment. And whether that's because, I lived and worked in Kenya for a long time. I have a good understanding of it, but I don't know it. Same thing for our trainers. Much as they live and work in Nairobi, they don't live and work in the schools environment. So if they could just as easily say, right, we think they need this. No. Listen to what the learners really need, and make sure you're being flexible and adaptive as you go. And that to me is the power of it. And that, coming on to a point, what I'm sure we'll get to in a minute, is the systems learning. Is that a top-down approach can't work. It's fatally flawed from the off because the needs of individuals are similar but different. And so what you need to do is build a systems response that is flexible at that local level, that provides the knowledge, but also the space for learning.
Okay. All right. That's good. Let's explore that then, because for the layman, let's look at it from someone who doesn't know what that means. So when you say, well, what I want to explore now is what you mean by systems learning, and what the top down that you were talking about before, why does that fail, and why is the systems learning element important and fundamental to the stuff that you do?
Mm-hmm. We're working with somewhere between 20 and 40 schools in Nairobi. There are hundreds, thousands of schools in Kenya. There are significantly more than that across the entire continent, of schools that are desperately trying to do what they can to provide a quality education for millions of young children. And this is the future of the continent. This is so coming up with a solution that works with 5, 10, 15, 20, 40 schools is as good as doing nothing, because it doesn't, all it's ever going to do is make us feel good. We've done something for some schools, some children, something, but it ultimately, it barely touches the sides on a far bigger problem. What's critical is to come up with or be developing solutions that are going to work at scale, and that's about systems. We can't launch, a solution, one individual solution across the millions. We need to come up with a system that makes this work. And so the power in what we would hope to be able to do is to come up with something that is scalable. We're not there yet, but it's to have that in mind. I mean, in the international education sector, we spend an awful lot of time looking at little pilot programs, and far too often we're not asking at the outset, can this scale? Is this a potential systemic solution, or systems-wide solution? And if the answer is either I don't know, if you don't know, then go do some thinking on that before we run a pilot. And if the answer is no, then it's useless. Then all it's ever going to do is to solve for a few children, and that's it. And for as long as the program, and that's no good. So the need is so large that anything less than a solution that can be taken to a systems level is pointless.
Before we continue, a quick thank you from our sponsor, OpenElm's Learning Generator. With just a text prompt or document, AI instantly builds a full professional course, complete with video presenters, quizzes, animations, and voiceovers in any language. You can edit everything online and export it as e-learning, a PowerPoint or video. And you can even export it as a podcast or video game experience. The best part, you can try it free for 14 days and see how you can use this special agentic AI system to transform your training at openelms.ai. Back to the show.
So describe the systems level though. I want you to define what that means in terms of a systems level approach to a solution across a country, a continent. Like what are you specifically getting at?
Yeah, we need to. Schools are struggling, and so ultimately, we need an education system that provides for all children, in whether it's Kenya or more widely. You can't do that on an individual basis. Ultimately, the country Kenya is the provider of education. Legally, is the provider of education for all Kenyan children. They need to be able to manage that. That requires a system. They can't set up a system that manages individual schools. You can't, because you'd be talking about thousands. It becomes an unmanageable problem. So you need to have some sort of a pyramid structure, whether that's central to counties, to local level and beyond. You need to have some sort, because you can't do it. But the challenge is, as we were just talking about, the solutions at this level are quite different from school to school. And so it's coming. The real challenge is coming up with a systems-wide solution that provides for that different solution at local level.
Let me try and summarize. Let me see if I'm on the right path and correct me if I'm wrong. You've got what is required here is almost if you're taking the Kenyan education system as an example, countrywide, there needs to be a simple source of truth for the data that's fed into it in terms of the children, the levels they're attaining, where they're getting to, where they're behind, what they got, what they achieved, what they didn't achieve. But at local levels at the moment, I'm assuming it's almost impossible because everybody's doing it slightly differently. And so it's very difficult to know exactly who's got what, who hasn't got what. So what you're calling for here is, when you're saying systems, systems management, if you like, is almost, if you say it's a pyramid structure, single source of truth at the top. It's okay to have cascading down to other systems that are, whether they're learning management systems, e-portfolio systems, content creation systems, whatever it might be, accreditation systems, whatever you're saying, or whatever the local level chooses for their solutions, it has to feed into a single source of truth in the sense of the data that's being measured and what is being collated. Is that what we're getting at?
Yeah, I think that's very much it. Ultimately, assuming that single source is the high point is the Ministry of Education, they've always going to have finite resources, and they need a system which enables them to say, right, how do we use these resources most effectively? We can't just say, right, each school gets, or you can just say each school gets X shillings on an annual basis and have at it. But that is never going to provide there will be areas where that works well, areas where you won't provide. There are certain areas of more need, certain areas of, well, I'm struggling to say less need because every school in Kenya is of need. So, but you need to know where you can focus your resources, where there is an issue. So you need a solution where you can look and say, right, okay, we've got these 3 counties are lower performing. So, and then can we dial down into that and see, right, this is where we need to be focusing our resources. So it's, coming back to that point, I was saying you can't design something that just works in a sub county. So what? That's not that provides for a small amount of children. It's not that isn't valuable, but yeah, you need something that links the whole thing.
So forgive me for mine. So what I'm trying to get at now is you're doing this for, let's say, 20 to 40 schools in Kenya, right? And you're doing it almost because there's a need, it needs to be done. But secondly, you need to get to a point where you're using that as a case study to say, this is how we can replicate this across the country. So has your organization been given a platform to say, we're doing this with 40 schools. Once we've done it, we're going to present the findings with the aim of that if it's successful, we'll be rolling this out at a national level? Or is it a bit further back than that? Well, at what point do you go, right, well, this has been successful for the people that we've implemented it for and the schools we've implemented these solutions, at what point then can it cascade?
We've been fortunate. Lucky. I think it's a little bit more than that. I think we've got a good team who've been working in this area for a good period of time, who bring a lot of knowledge and experience. And so the things we've tried out, based off decades of experience, and so they're working quite impressively at a level that can be scaled very, very quickly. So I think already we're a situation where we can start having conversations with those within the ministry and say, listen, come and see what we're doing. As you said, we're only working with say we're up coming up to 40 schools now. That's a pilot, but there are lessons we have from this which we think are applicable across the board. There are certain things that, we're fortunate, we've got some funds, we can invest in certain things, but we're finding very quickly that a number of these investments pay for themselves. And therefore, they're ultimately zero cost. You need to find finance to cover the initial investment, but they provide a return. And so they're ultimately zero cost improvements, but zero cost inputs to the system, but are having a significant improvement on the system. And then it's about advocating with the Ministry of Education. And the Kenya Ministry of Education is a very open and relatively easy to engage institution. And so our role is, we could just sit here and say, right, we're working with 40 schools, well done us. But if we're true for what we're trying to do, which is trying to impact as many children as possible, it's on us to take that learning and share it more widely, whether it's with other organizations that are working in the space, or whether it's with the national system and feeding into that.
Well, that's a good point. You kind of stumbled across that, which is there are other organizations in Africa. There's other organizations in Kenya. how much appetite is there for collaboration, genuinely? How much appetite is there for, look, let's bring the best of the best and let's work together to try and provide a solution that works for every child in Kenya and beyond? And how much of it is we're only in it for our own elements, our own local needs, our own local resources, and we're not really that bothered about everybody else? Like, I mean, what is the appetite like on the ground?
There's an awful lot of rhetoric about it. I'll be frank with you. In the sector, there's an awful lot of people who look. There is the vast majority of people working in international development. Almost everyone working in international development is doing it for the right reasons. There is a desire to support, to further, whether it's education system, health systems, social systems. Almost anyone is in it for the right reasons, and we should be starting off that basis. That doesn't mean that the resources are well used. There is certainly within the sectors I've worked in, there's been an increased focus on the risks of operating, and risk and reward. If you take no risks, you're steered away from innovations. You're steered away from things that can make huge advances to the systems we're working in. So I'm not advocating we should take as many risks as we want, but it's about taking calculated risks to me then. And an awful lot of times, because of donors' accountability back to the governments and the way that has been structured over years, it has meant that there is a huge risk aversion. The UK government would regularly talk about, will it pass the Daily Mail test? Nothing ever passed the Daily Mail test because there's no such thing. But it's the wrong question to be asking. We should be asking, is this something that's going to shift the needle on whether it's education or health or whatever? And that's been lost. I referred to a lot of the pilots that have gone on. There's an awful lot of focus on things like foundational learning, which is it's not a new term. It's a renaming of a term that's always existed, but it's about the basics in education, getting the basics right, and ensuring children can read and write and can do basic numeracy. This is nothing new, but we term it foundational learning. There's a huge amount of resources that are put on this app, and it is absolutely a priority. But if you go to the vast majority of classes, the schools across the continent, what goes on in the classroom for most school administrators is very important, but they're having to deal with a whole range of other issues first. If you've got classrooms that are falling to pieces, if you've got class sizes of 100 to 1, 100 kids to one teacher, if you've got no textbooks, if you've got, knowing, you can't pay your teachers. These are more pressing issues than what's going on in the class. It's not that you don't care what's going on in the classroom. Of course you do. But I mean, we see, and we're working in a place like Kibera in Nairobi. These are informal settlements. There's no government doesn't provide any services there, so no water, sanitation, etc. We see classrooms where there's open sewage down the side of a school, which often, if it rains, overflows into the school. That's the biggest priority for a teacher. He's worried about sewage coming through his classrooms. He needs that fixed. We went out to a school just a few weeks ago where, outside Nairobi, where a school of about 500 kids, they have one toilet for 300 girls. You can talk to them about what's going on in the classroom and they will have a conversation. But ultimately, their biggest priority is more toilets for the kids, because that's, clear those issues, those systemic, and that's it comes back to the bit I was saying.
Yeah. I mean, that's so beyond, I hate to say the term, but it's so beyond first world problems. We're talking to people about, how do you ensure everybody in an organization gets, an individualized pathway so that they can get, the right learning developments at the right time? How do we ensure that people don't get with the rise of AI, get completely written out of the workforce because, the jobs are no longer there because AI has ensured there's no middle management tier anymore because they're not required. All of this stuff.
Yeah.
Which is, I've been to Africa. I've seen firsthand what I've traveled through, and I have seen firsthand the kind of things you're talking about. It is quite staggering, really. But it's what lessons can you take from that, though, from a systems issue, which is fundamentally about human life and death, right? I mean, what we're talking about here is like, in that example, one toilet, 300 girls. 300 girls of what age, Felix, in this particular example?
These are from lower primary all the way through to upper secondary. So, I mean,
so you've got everything from a young child, a child who is still learning, their bathroom techniques, to girls becoming women.
Yeah.
And who have their own issues, right?
Yeah.
Let's be honest. So these are all things that they're having to go through, and then education becomes completely secondary, because it's like, how do we just maintain the human dignity and life that they can have at this point in this area which you're trying to set up? So the stakes are so much higher. It's just beyond comprehension.
It is, but the solutions are there. I mean, that's the interesting we're finding. I mean, the schools will
go on then. Let's explore these solutions.
Yeah. It's the schools we're working with are run by very capable, competent people, but they don't necessarily have the knowledge and sometimes the mindset to recognize the resources they have and to use them most effectively. One of the most simple things, one of the most simple and most impactful things we've done with the schools is to support the installation of a school management system. It's a basic piece of software. It's a business management software. But you're talking about schools who they collect fees, but at a relatively minor level. But all this was being collected in notebooks, paper and pencil. Which is time-consuming, hugely inaccurate. Switching to a computer-based system reduces inaccuracies wildly, reduces the amount of time they're doing, but also gives them an accurate picture of where they are, how much fees they've collected, where, parents are not coming in and spending an awful lot of time and effort saying, well, I thought I paid this, where, they've got a clear record. It's a simple tool, and one that, because of those efficiencies, has led to an improved fee collection. It should be clear. This varies across the schools we're working. Some are fee paying, some are state schools, but schools in Kenya are allowed to charge fees. Education is technically free, but schools are allowed to, where they don't necessarily have sufficient budget, they're allowed to negotiate with their parents for an additional contribution. And so that's what we're talking about for the most part. But this collection of fees is hugely inefficient. It's time consuming for the schools, for the parents, and everything. Introducing a computerized system, switching to automatic methods of payment, whether it's via bank transfers, via mobile payments, long story short, our schools have gone from spending 2 or 3 days a week managing fees to about an hour. And their fee collections have jumped from anywhere around 40-50% on a termly basis to 100%. So this is saving time, improving money, taking the time and space to solve these issues we're talking about. And that's just one example.
See what I mean? So by doing that, you're freeing up time to allow them to concentrate on the other things that really matter.
Yeah. And we've not provided training. Well, we provided limited training on how to use the software. The school directors it's a powerful piece of software. It's not just about fee collection. It allows for, attendance, performance, budgeting, etc. The schools have taken it on themselves, and they're using it in different ways, and they're finding interesting and innovative ways to use it to provide. But it's that we've provided them with some knowledge and someone to ask advice on, so that, for example, the software providers, they can talk to and say, right, what do I do here? How do I make this work like this? But it's having a huge impact on the schools. And that's then creating the time and sometimes the income to solve the issues like the toilets or the sewage. So that's the connection.
Yes, yeah, it's odd, isn't it? Because is the internet in these areas good? Do you know what I mean? So this is where it's strange, isn't it? Like they don't have They then might have physical resources like a toilet or more than one, but the internet seems to work, and you've got
Yeah,
computers.
Kenya's very lucky. The mobile data connections are cheap and readily available. There are a lot of Chinese smartphones on the market, relatively cheap and affordable. It's by no means everyone has them. So, but Kenya's lucky in that context. In the internet's relatively cheap and accessible to the vast majority. So,
okay, well, we might explore that. We might explore that slightly towards it. But so thanks for that. So, okay, so look, you've built skills where resources are limited. Okay, so you're building your skill sets and things and the stakes are pretty high, as we found out. So, what did these experiences teach you about what makes learning or training actually stick? Like, you don't have the resources like a large global training organizer or a large global organization that can throw resources to a certain extent at their people and say, look at this learning library you've got, look at this and look at that, and let's measure the data here and who completed that. So you don't have that luxury to a certain extent. So how can you gauge your experiences on what really works?
We talked about this quite a bit. In the international development field, there's always a tendency to fall back on some traditional research methods to test impact. The impact evaluations and numerous things, and we've done none of that. And I'm very comfortable with that, and it's something I defend very well, because sometimes you can just working in resource poor environments, the potential for improvements and change is that much larger, which means that you don't need a tool to measure the impact. You can see it, and so we've taken that and said, right, that's fair enough. We can do. I mean, we were just visiting schools we started working with a year ago, and it's just talking to the proprietor, the school director, and the change in their approach is just seismic. A year ago, talking to a young woman who's running a school, and she could barely hold eye contact. She was very shy, very, very sort of nervous. A year later, she's come out of her shell. She's just this incredible. And then it's stories. What we've fallen on is that we need to be telling, to show the impact. It's about telling those stories. That is the best way, because each one of these schools has had a different journey. We could pull data which shows some of this, but it's not as impactful as hearing these stories. And so that's what we've fallen on, is we've chosen as sort of methods to demonstrate the impact. Beyond just saying to people, don't talk to us. Of course we're going to talk it up, but go talk to those who we're working with, those who have been impacted by the training, who are benefiting from the training. Talk to them in their own environments when we're not there. See what they say. We trust that we can see the impact is so clear that it almost doesn't need measuring. That's probably not quite the answer you're looking for. And is that how can we do
it's not even, in fairness, Felix, it's not really the answer I'm looking or not looking for. It's the answer, right?
Yeah.
So it's not for me to say whether that's a good or a bad thing. It's merely to say, like, how do you guys in limited resource areas look at what you're doing and look at the training that's happening and all that kind of stuff, and ensure that it's making an impact and it's sticking. Now, I appreciate qualitative data as much as the next person. I've got no issue with the case of speak to the people on the ground, speak to the people who are doing it, and get that. Obviously, in more resource-rich organizations, they have other mechanisms. They'll try and find a mixture between qualitative and quantitative, and they'll have feedback forms, and they'll have this and they'll have that, and they'll say, fill this out, whatever. And so you can you can try and gauge it as best you can. And then obviously the completion data then speaks for itself. How many people completed? How many people didn't? Was that training effective? Let's revisit it in 6 months. What stuck, what didn't? There's a variety of stuff that systems can do. I appreciate you don't have the luxury of that. So it was more just exploring how you do, ensure that what you're doing has a fundamental impact. If you're saying that we talk to them, what I'd be interested in, Felix, is that if you're using this, it was something to be like a pilot that gets rolled out. You'd like to see it cascade out to other areas. Like at some point, it would become a little bit too large to be, we'll just go and speak to people at different schools. Do you know what I mean? It would be like, how do you ensure the feedback mechanism allows you to fundamentally show that the impact of what you're doing is making a fundamental difference?
Yeah.
That's probably where I'd be with that. But look,
yeah,
go on. I'll let you respond to that.
No, I mean, that is fair. I think it's one of the challenges with working in basic education, primary, secondary education, is ultimately to see the impact is often far longer, certainly longer than political timetables allow, which is a challenge in itself. I mean, governments come in, they want to reform education systems. The reality is that the impact on an education system will take 7-8 years. There's no political party that comes on that has an election term of 7-8 years. And there's almost a disincentive, therefore, to do the right thing because it won't show you the results within the... I'm more of a supporter of coming up with cross-party education policy, allowing it, say, 10 years to bed in before looking to substantially reform it. But no, it's fun. I think, we're in the relative infancy of this program. There are some metrics we could look at. The look at school performance ultimately, a better school will lead to children doing more better. They'll be spending more better.
That's all right.
Yeah, doing better. Their exam marks will improve, their attendance will improve. There are metrics we can use, and there will be at a systemic level. So that's possible. Though Kenya is moving away from the more historical version of education where you take an exam at a certain time and because recognizing this is not necessarily the best way to assess children and to support children's education. So that will. They're going towards more, as we use in the UK, at expected or out exceeding or below expected. So that sort of, which is a more effective way of doing it. So, but there are certainly metrics that show this. I mean, we talked about fee collection there. We haven't documented baselines purely because we wanted to get started before we do it, and we are doing it for position people who've been operating in this field so bring that knowledge of what will work. We can certainly document that, but I'm not at a systems level. There will be metrics for it, but it's just understanding the education. They're longer than I think any other sector.
Yeah, I mean, in fairness, I also take the point that when it comes to this level of stuff, there's a political element to it where politics can get involved, and unfortunately, I mean, it's the same everywhere. It's the same in the UK, the US. In certain terms, people don't want to stick their neck out necessarily unless it's going to do them any favors or their party any favors. And so, you end kind of just having this kind of like, everyone just treading water.
Yeah.
Whereas fundamentally, the cross-party collaboration, kind of something independent from the political parties at the time, when it's as important as education, health, whatever. It's like, no, forget what, let's come together and plot a way forward that fits for everybody, rather than just, oh, look at what we did because we belong to this party, aren't we amazing? And then, 2 months later, it all falls apart and it's like, oh, it was their fault. But, it's that kind of thing that I think is important. Look, in the time we've got left, thanks for that. So we've delved into quite a lot of stuff here, but one of the things obviously we've been talking about is obviously the rise of technology, and in certain obviously more the impact of AI on technology and on the spaces that people are working in. Now, what have you noticed? Is there anything that you've come across? And so you've talked about obviously technology in the sense of implementing better systems for schools that allow them to then go and concentrate on other resources where fundamentally they can make an impact, right? So obviously there's technology and there's systems there, which you're trying to sort of get, up and running and start helping people move forward, because it will have a fundamentally positive impact. So then that's not just saying that, let's throw technology at everything for technology's sake. It's trying to use practical examples to try and show where you can make some forward strides. But in the impact of AI, have you, in a personal level, been influenced or affected by the rise of AI? And also, can you see AI having a fundamental impact on things that are happening in Africa, where you've been doing these projects over the last few years, positively or negatively? Okay, we're completely agnostic on this, so you go for it.
Yeah. Well, we're using AI. We just started using, we get the terminology wrong, but AI in the program with schools. And we're working with now 40 schools. We've got an awful lot of data that we've collected, that we're sitting on. We were using Notion as a database. And we were collecting all this data. We weren't using it. It was just sitting there. And our IT advisor said, have you thought about using AI to actually provide some analysis of this? Because, and so now we're doing that. Now we've set up our own server. We dumped the data in now, and now I've got an app on my phone. I can, if I want to find out about any one of the schools worker, I just ask it to tell me, and it tells me all about the schools. It's incredibly, it suddenly made that data, which was all but inaccessible, available, which is incredible. And now we are going to start to, but we're using it as a management tool, an administrative tool, as a way of analyzing what we're doing. What we're not doing is using it with the schools yet. We're looking at it, but I want to be really careful there, because I think that there are huge risks associated with that. Assuming it's going to be a tool for all. So I think it comes back to a little bit what I'm saying, and I think it also speaks to how it can be used across whether it's Kenya or more broadly. We talked, Kenya's lucky; its data is both cheap and readily available. Other countries are not anywhere near as fortunate, where internet is expensive, the coverage is patchy. You mentioned South Sudan earlier; it's terrible there. I mean, you cannot rely. You're talking of schools where, if they are collecting data in the schools, they then have to travel to a second location to be somewhere where they can upload data. So even basic, attendance data, school pupil data, they have to do that. So it's there are a lot of places across the continent and more broadly that don't have that accessibility data. So it's. If we are going to use, whether it's AI or other IT tools, it's understanding that it needs to be considered from all the learners. When we're looking at the schools we're working with, it's ensuring that we go to the schools first and see what's possible, what would be helpful to you, what facilities do you have to use this, and therefore, so it's more about. The same way we've done it, using our internal system. It's like, these are the sort of things it could do. What do you think would be helpful for you in your school or in groups of schools? Making sure that it's driven by, again, it touches what I said, the learners. And it's not just, wow, this looks like a really cool tool. Roll it out, give it to everybody. And it's like, might work. I would imagine there will be a number of the schools that are better off already will take that tool and use it effectively. But for those most in need, it'll be utterly useless. In fact, it could be even worse to use, as it becomes an impediment to education, because there's
I can understand that. I mean, if you're talking from a resources for all, the resources are going to reach 60% of the population of who you're trying to train. Yeah. And then the other 40% get even further left behind, because they don't access it. And part of the successful outcomes is linked to the resource that you've implemented and they can't access it. So, they're just they'll then be they'll be impeded because they can't get access.
Exactly.
That's just exploring that a little bit more then, Felix, in terms of, is there a danger at the moment? And I think obviously there's a lot of different sides and a lot of different arguments to this. There are a lot of people saying that artificial intelligence is going to be the downfall of humanity. It's going to be the making of it. There's a lot of extreme views on either side of that debate. In terms of education, and just human development generally. But is there a danger a little bit here that as the West continues to go down this drive of implementing further AI solutions to try and make gains, to try and make efficiencies, to try and keep plowing through? I know there's dangers in all of that, don't get me wrong, but is the divide going to become even more stark than it already is? Because the infrastructure and the resources clearly aren't there in a lot of these African countries to enable them to get their populace up and running at the very base ground level. Whereas these other countries where we're trying to say, oh, first world, second world, third world, let's try and bring, it's just going to become further and further apart, unless I'm missing something.
I mean, the dangers you set out there are very real. I think there is a potential, but I think the other aspect of this as well is that, again, Kenya is a particularly good example. You've got a reasonably well-educated, in the global context, population. Doesn't Facebook run a number of its, when it's reviewing posts, it uses centers in Kenya to review it because there are people who are skilled and capable in IT. They are using and abusing it, and that's not acceptable. But there is capacity there, and so maybe there's a potential for a more grassroots development. I have a good friend of mine who from Malawi who lives and works there, and he said it was very interesting there. Looking back over the last sort of 30, 40 years, education used to be very elite. It was really for, it was a very narrow pyramid. If you got up to the top, you got a very good quality education, but it narrowed very early. Very far few people got on secondary education, and and in the 90s, it expanded, education for all, primary and then secondary education has been made free, and it's flooded the system. And there was a real gap. So for a period where people coming through the education system, with this sort of flooding of the system, the quality dropped off a cliff. It was actually a challenge to come through the education, and that was true at the primary, secondary, and tertiary level, just because the system was flooded. That it just couldn't churn out or provide a good quality education for all, because it was never designed that way. But he said it's interesting now with increased access to education, you are seeing young adults come through with a far better quality of it, not universally, but it's starting to come. That people who have critical thinking skills that are not necessarily picked up from schools, because the schools haven't got substantially better in that period, but they've been able to educate themselves. And so I think that's the potential.
So by educating themselves, are you talking about because they've got access to online resources, they're able to educate themselves a little bit more about what's just happening in the world and how they can do certain things, and they can then use them in their everyday lives? Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, exactly. And
okay, let's very quickly then.
Yeah.
So are we saying that there's the opportunity here is that whilst you could argue, well, will these countries become further and further apart? Actually, there's a counter argument to that, which actually they are primed for personalized pathways, because if you can give them access to a smartphone, and you can give them access to an internet connection that works, and you give them access to resources and education that works on those smartphones, that they will seemingly, you'll start to see the fruits of that. Or are we saying no?
There's some potential. I wouldn't want to overplay it.
Yes.
I think, say Kenya is probably better off than most, but a lot of countries face a significant number of barriers. And so if we're talking about, economic development, but also, to take Africa as a continent, there is a large youth population, and the world is going to need youth to we're seeing across Europe that we don't necessarily have the numbers of young people that we need to continue growing our economies. Africa does. That's a resource. I mean, now whether that's a resource that gets taken advantage of or a resource that gets utilized, that's another question.
Yeah.
But there's certainly potential there.
I would love to explore that, but unfortunately our time limit was, we could go on for quite a long on that one. Okay, look, what we usually ask at the end of this is if there's one thing that you would want anybody who listened to this or read about the article afterwards to take away in terms of, what you would like them to remember about what you're doing or what's happening that you're seeing, what would it?
That I've been saying, it's about making the learner central, about the centering what we do on those who are to benefit from it, seeing things from their perspective, whether that's a learning or a development environment. It's not treating those, whether they be children, whether they be less experienced, as empty vessels, recognizing that they bring skills and experience which can add significantly to whether it's the education system or it's the employment. I think that's the, no one is an empty vessel. Everyone brings experience, and that experience is valuable.
Okay, there's the soundbite. Thank you, Felix. Okay, well, look, thank you so much, Felix, for that. It's been enlightening. I appreciate the challenges that your organization is going through. I think it'd be interesting to see what happens. It's a country, Kenya, which I've been to, and I loved it, absolutely loved it. But it's a continent which is just breathtaking, and it would be amazing to see the people there start to thrive, given the right resources and the right backing. It would be amazing. So yeah, something that I probably in my lifetime I probably won't get to see, but hopefully my children do. But I think I just hope that, as you said at the end there, where there's the people is a massive resource that you just hope that they don't get exploited, and that as a resource doesn't get exploited to the detriment of the countries and the continent they represent. That's just key here. I think that we don't use technology or AI to make the situation worse. Like, if it's going to be used, make it be used alongside people who can make it work for them, not to overpower them and overcome them.
No, I mean, there's something in the fact that we are moving back from international development, whether it's the UK or the US. This is actually an opportunity, and I speak to a number of people who operate in the space saying, look, this isn't good because it's happened too quickly and that's causing damage. But long term, this may be a far better thing, because it means that countries will be in control. Instead of
they don't know being beholden to whoever. Take it up the man and go, and just start to do it. Yeah, absolutely. We can hope. Okay. Well, look, thank you, Felix.